Viktor Orban is gone after 16 years as Hungary's Prime Minister. And Asma, if you remember right at the beginning of this year, I picked Péter Magyar as one of the people to watch for 2026.
Indeed.
I'm feeling pretty pleased with myself. Péter Magyar is the new Prime Minister of Hungary. He won in a landslide.
Now, Viktor Orban has been an extremely close partner to both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. So much so that in that final week of campaigning in Hungary, the American Vice-President JD Vance made an appearance.
Mr. President, you are on with about 5,000 Hungarian patriots, and I think they love you even more than they love Viktor Orban.
Well, I can't believe that. I can't believe that because I love Hungary and I love that Viktor. I'll tell you, he's a fantastic man. We've had a tremendous relationship.
But Vance's endorsement wasn't enough to save Orban.
So a big question is, why did Hungary's election matter so much to the Trump administration? And what does Viktor Orban's defeat mean now for the right worldwide?
From the BBC, I'm Tristan Redmond.
And I'm Asma Khalid, and welcome to The Global Story on YouTube.
Before we dive in, we recorded this episode before Sunday's late result came in, but it does answer all the big questions about how an election in a relatively small European country has become such big international news. This is my conversation with the BBC's Europe editor, Katya Adler. Enjoy. First of all, Katya, we'd like to share with you a video from mid-January Viktor Orban posted on X. I'm going to show it to you. Could you talk us through it, please?
Hi, this is Rob Schneider.
Dear friends in Hungary.
Chers patriotes hongrois, liebe Fidesz-Mitglieder.
So what we have here is Viktor Orban posting a video where you see the great and the good of the right and far right, largely in Europe, but also beyond. We've got former Polish President Morawiecki, known also to be very much on the right, sharing this idea of an anti-immigration stance, a pro-Christian stance, very Eurosceptic. Alice Weidel here of the AfD, the far-right party of Germany. Giorgia Meloni, Italy's Prime Minister. We have a guest starring appearance of Javier Milei of Argentina, a real close ally of Donald Trump's, for example. Interestingly, here you also have Benjamin Netanyahu. We even have Rob Schneider there. He is a US comedian. And all of these figures saying, vote for Viktor Orban. He stands for the right values and he is absolutely necessary to lead Hungary. So it's sort of support for Viktor Orban ahead of his election and trying to show that although he has many opponents in Europe, within the European Union, this then was a video for him saying, look, I have loads of friends, loads of supporters, leaders of political parties and big figures in Europe and beyond.
Well, all of this was followed up by praise from the Trump administration. Marco Rubio visited Hungary in February and he said, President Trump is deeply committed to your success because your success is our success. Then last month, President Trump himself appeared in a video shown ahead of Orban's keynote speech at the CPAC Hungary conference, which is a kind of conservative action committee conference, which happens regularly in Hungary.
I also want to send my best wishes to Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who I am endorsing, as you know. I am endorsing his election, which is coming up pretty soon.
What does it mean that all these figures on the right are so explicitly endorsing Viktor Orban? Why is it that they are all coming out in support of him?
So I think with Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, there was a particular message sent, actually, because when did he go? So Marco Rubio had just been to the Munich Security Conference and he gave a gentle-ish speech to the Europeans there, but with a very clear message. We see you as our allies, but only if you adhere to our value system. Now, who adheres to the Trump value system? Viktor Orban. What are we talking about there? Traditional family values, they would say, Christian values. So when they say his success, as in Viktor Orban's success at the ballot box will be our success, that is seen as a success for their vision for Europe. And it is a vision that Viktor Orban shares, that in his 16 years in government, but particularly in the last years, he has been outspoken about. It's also curbing woke expression, as they would see in society, getting control in academic institutions over NGOs and so on and so on and so on. That is the Orban playbook. And it is a playbook that he would say inspired Donald Trump in his re-election campaign. And certainly Donald Trump mentioned Viktor Orban on that re-election campaign. And you do have to think, I remember thinking at the time, why are you mentioning Hungary? Hungary is this tiny European country. Even for so many Americans, you look at Europe as it's a tiny place made up of tiny countries. Well, even within the tiny countries, Hungary is a really, really small one. And yet Viktor Orban punches above his weight on the world stage in the eyes of Donald Trump, but also here in Europe. And the reason that you saw all of those right-wing figures in his video is for the same reason.
You mentioned the Orban playbook, Katya. What are the elements of the Orban playbook which other leaders in Europe have adopted or would like to adopt if they get into power?
He has large control, not total, large control over the media in Hungary. He has clamped down on left-leaning or woke, as he would see it, non-governmental organizations. You could use the word cronies. It's a very loaded phrase, but let's say people close to Orban have been given big positions in big state institutions, whether it's in academia, whether it's in, the largest energy group, MOL or MOL. The judiciary, that's something that Brussels, that the European Union criticizes often about Hungary and says it's not a free, open judiciary. And so that's actually why the EU has held back funds from Hungary that Hungary depends on since 2022, because it says that this is not a proper, open, free and fair democracy. The rule of law is not here, but it is a playbook that parties to the right of the right across Europe think, it makes sense to us. It's still a democracy, still have freedom of speech. We wouldn't be able to say, Orban says this, the fact that the opposition is doing so well in the polls right now, about 10 points ahead of his party for these elections, is proof that Hungary is still a vibrant democracy, he would say. But it is a playbook that others have mimicked and looked at, and that Orban likes to say that Donald Trump also used part of his style and his aims when he was looking for re-election now.
Can you talk us through what his relationship is with the EU leaders in Brussels? Well, he often turns up at these summits and there is a lot of butting of heads.
There is. His relationship with the EU is bad, and it's got worse over the years. He will criticize Brussels. He will accuse Brussels as a shorthand for the EU of trying to hamper Hungarian sovereignty, of imposing wokeness on Hungary and acting against Hungary's interests, and trying to get migrants to enter Hungary. And what it means is that when the European Union tries to take collective action, such as relocating migrants, Hungary is always right there amongst the countries that say, no, we're not taking it. When it comes to Ukraine, he has blocked successive sanctions packages against Russia since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. In the end, he has sort of given in over that, but he is seen as a blocker. And most importantly, blocking this 90 billion or 100 billion US dollar loan package for Ukraine. And people are outraged. They are sickened. So what have they done? Well, Brussels says it's taken very strong action in that, as I say, it's withheld funds that Hungary relies on, agricultural funds and more, since 2022. Because when it comes to Russia-Ukraine, there is a general acceptance amongst European Union countries that this is an existential war. But the fact that Viktor Orban takes such a different position in this is really detrimental to Hungary's relationship. But it's also hurting him now, Tristan, I would argue, because of the lack of EU funds. That's part of the reason that we see Hungary's economy doing really badly. Inflation is high. Voters are suffering. So it's kind of ricocheted against Viktor Orban in the end. It was useful to be against Brussels. Right now, I'm not saying that everybody in Hungary is pro-EU. That's not what I'm talking about. But not having access to those funds is hurting.
Orban's been around for a very long time. I mean, he's been a fixture on the political scene in Hungary since the fall of the Iron Curtain in the late 80s. But here he is with a very credible opponent in the election. When did you first come across this character, Péter Magyar?
Well, I think he generally rose to prominence with the 2024 European parliamentary elections, and his party did very well, in those elections. And again, using the shorthand for the EU, Brussels was cock a hoop, because they thought, right here, there is a credible opposition to Viktor Orban. Péter Magyar used to be in Viktor Orban's party. So we're not looking at a totally different political frame of mind. He is in that big group inside the European Parliament, the Conservatives, the EPP, but he probably fits very much to the right of that group. So we don't really know how much his policies will differ once he's in government, because if you have a look at how his party votes in the European Parliament, when it comes to migration, when it comes to these hot button issues in Hungary, they tend to vote with Viktor Orban's party. And otherwise, they'll often abstain. Might they be different when they get into government? We don't know that. They promise, at least on a foreign policy point of view and from Brussels' point of view, to be interested in working with the European Union, interested also in working with the United States, but not to change the policy towards Ukraine. So what will that mean exactly? And definitely in Kyiv, if not in Brussels as well, people are kind of wondering, okay, even if you move the blocker in chief, is this going to be a mini blocker? Or, who is Péter Magyar really going to be?
It's also been quite a spicy campaign. What can you tell us about the spicy parts of it?
So Péter Magyar, who's the leader of the opposition, he said that there was possibly a sex tape out there. Now, Fidesz, the party of Viktor Orban, said they didn't know anything about it. And we haven't seen this. I don't know if you've seen it, Tristan.
It has not appeared yet.
It has not appeared. So, but that was brought up. But it's a pretty nasty campaign as well. And Péter Magyar certainly made an accusation at a big rally that there were sort of top Russian agents that were helping run the Orban campaign. And actually, I'd like to just pause there, if you don't mind, Tristan, just to say something about Orban and Russia, because I think this is key. He is seen as the closest to Russia. That is not what Hungarians would vote for. The way he sells it at home is that it's a pragmatic relationship with Russia. Why would you have a relationship? Well, because Russia is the place to get cheap energy from. And Hungarians would like access to cheap energy because they'd like to pay less. So it's less, I love Russia, and more, Russia is a very useful partner for Hungary. It's in Hungary's national interest. Viktor Orban's also painted Russia as a reliable partner, unlike Europe that has strings attached. He's not passionate about Russia. He plays that very, very carefully. But his critics say he is in Russia's pocket. It's got to that extent that we have certain meetings inside the EU where other countries will say, let's not include the Hungarians because they're worried about leakage. And all of this has been refuted. It's become quite nasty and personal. And the allegations of this sex tape as well.
So I would say that there is a case that the spicy sensationalist aspects of this election campaign are actually germane to the coherence of the future of European politics, because these suggestions that Russia might be a player that interferes in elections, as some people have suggested is the case in Hungary, is going to become a regular occurrence in European politics. What would you say to that?
But those allegations are nothing new, the idea of Russia misinformation or disinformation. And sometimes there's been proof that's been kind of presented by European governments. And in other cases, it's allegations made and assumptions made because the way that Russia operates is plausible deniability. I don't think this is a big secret, or is it a scandalous or an outrageous thing to say that Russia is involved in what we call hybrid warfare. And so that is not getting the guns out and it's not getting the tanks out, but it can be sabotage, subterfuge, espionage, or disinformation, misinformation. So I think there is nothing new about that. Is it paranoia? Part of it is paranoia, but paranoia, you could argue, is a very useful weapon as well. for Russia if it wants to destabilize, which it seems to want to, and reduce coherence amongst European Union countries. Interestingly, critics of the Trump administration would say exactly the same thing, that China, Washington under Donald Trump, and Russia seek to weaken ties between European countries because they're more easy to manipulate if they are separated rather than working as a force together. What we do see with the Trump administration that you can point to directly is direct interference in European politics. You quoted Donald Trump yourself, speaking out in favor of Viktor Orban winning this election. Last year, when there was a presidential election in Poland, he had his Homeland Defense Secretary fly over to Poland to speak out in favor of the Trump-friendly candidate. And I mean Trump-friendly. So in the crowd, people were wearing their MAGA hats and so on and so forth. Steve Bannon, who is very vocal in European politics, has spoken out in favor of Viktor Orban and his playbook and why his victory will be so important.
Can we game out a little bit the possible consequences of either permutation of the election? So if Orban were to lose, how big of a deal would that be?
If Viktor Orban loses this election, it will be massive because it's 16 years of Viktor Orban. It's 16 years of Viktor Orban's self-declared illiberal democracy shining a light for other similar-minded parties and hopefuls within Europe of what they can achieve and what they could do to get to power, to stay in power. It will send a message. Will it be the end of policymakers across Europe worrying about what they see as anti-democratic forces on the far right and the far left in Europe? Will it stop an end to concerns about Eurosceptic nationalist parties wanting to kind of break the European Union from within? Absolutely not. I always say, when things seem black and white, there's something wrong there, because life is shades of grey.
That was Katya Adler, the BBC's Europe editor. And that's it for this episode of The Global Story. We're also a podcast. We're available every weekday on bbc.com or wherever you listen. Thanks for tuning into this one. We'll see you next time. Cheerio.